Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the internet at michaeldukeshow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Good morning, my friends. Welcome to the program. It is the Monday edition of the Michael Dukes Show. We got a lot of stuff going on this week. It's going to be a busy week, and we are ready to dive into it this morning. We've got a full show on for you today. Interesting. I've been waiting for this because we got some interesting stuff that's we're about to go over. Coming up here in hour one of the big radio broadcast this morning, we're going to dive into kind of a what-if scenario. And I've wanted to talk about this for a while because this is a deep, deep topic. And I was definitely not qualified to talk about all this this morning. We're going to talk about ham radio, especially ham radio in emergency situations. And the more I looked into this topic, the more I realized that I needed I needed somebody who knew a lot more than I did to come in and talk about it this morning. We're going to be joined here in just a second by Kevin Tennant, who's a friend of mine from up in North Pole, who is a ham radio enthusiast. And he'll probably be the first one to tell you that I'm no expert. Well, he knows a lot more than I do. And we're going to go through some of the ins and outs of ham radio, some of the basics, and talk to you a little bit about it and how it can be used for everyday and emergency situations and just for fun. So it should be a fun discussion here with Kevin. We're going to be doing that here in hour one. In hour two, we're going to be joined by Nick Begich, candidate for U.S. Congress. And we're going to talk with him about the race and about his latest endorsement from the Freedom Caucus. And we'll get that stuff all squared away and ready to go this morning for discussion. So let's do it. We have more this week. There's lots of stuff happening. Of course, the session is ending on Wednesday. So everything everything is being dumped into the kitchen sink here in the last few days. And they tried to filibuster the female sports thing this weekend. I don't know if you saw that, but they were trying to filibuster the bill from the House that would have protected girls' sports from having trans boys come in and just wreck the sport. And the Democrats attempted to filibuster 86-something amendments through there. They finally made it through and it passed the House. Even Dan Ortiz voted for it, which I thought was an interesting commentary on the whole thing. But the Senate has already said they have no interest in picking it up this year. So I don't know if this was just sound and fury signifying nothing or what, but it was interesting. This is what we're going to see for the next 3 days here before the end of the session on Wednesday night. But anyway, we'll cover that stuff as we get closer to it here. I'm sure we'll talk a lot about it tomorrow and everything else, and on Wednesday, but without further ado, let's get over to my friend Kevin. And we'll jump into this here. He is joining us this morning from the downtown metropolis of North Pole, and he's going to give us a little bit of an idea of everything that's going on there. Hello, my friend. How are you this morning?
Good morning, sir. I'm great. Yourself?
You know, I am not doing too bad. You look like you're broadcasting from the space shuttle. You got all kinds of stuff and bells and whistles behind you. It's pretty exciting. And I'm happy to have you on this morning. Thank you for being part of it today.
Oh, my pleasure. Great to be on.
I said it earlier, and I still stand by it. You know, the more that I dove into ham radio as part of my preps for, you know, being ready for anything kind of thing, the more I looked into it, the more I realized, holy cow, I think I need somebody to handhold me through this, because there is a lot of stuff that goes on to this. It definitely gets you know, even if you're just looking for something simple, it you know, you can go down a rabbit hole. And in fact, the first time I started looking into ham radio for, like, man, I just need some handheld so that I can talk to people, you know, something that's better than CB. But I, you know, and the more next thing I know, I'm 2 hours later, I'm down some rabbit hole on stuff that it's like way over
Mhm.
my head. And I'm like, I'm just trying to figure this out. So that's when I decided I really needed to talk to somebody who knew a little bit more about it. And you came to mind because you had been espousing to me your enthusiasm for this new hobby that you picked up a few years ago. And the more we talked about it, the more I thought Kevin's the guy to kind of walk us through this. So first and foremost, tell us a little bit about the genesis of your journey into ham radio. What got you excited about it? What brought you on board here?
Sure. I actually had a CB radio in my room growing up. So that would have been back in the 70s when everybody had a CB radio. So I enjoyed the electronics aspect of the hobby from an early age. And then I got my amateur radio license in 2005 so I could join my friends on these caravans. We were doing a lot of traveling. And the 2-meter radios were awesome. And that was all I wanted, was just to be able to talk to my friends as we were traveling. The radios were far superior than the CB radios I had as a kid, or even that they still make today. When you get into amateur radio and you start buying some quality stuff, it is amazing the difference, the clarity and the distance you can speak, the different modes, FM, AM, sideband, single sideband, yeah, digital modes. So now we have handy talkies, which are digital, point to point, and digital voice, as well as repeaters that are digital. So it's come a long way. And the reason I got into amateur was just for the 2-meter handheld mobile aspect of it. It wasn't until later that I discovered HF, and then all this exploded around me with the big towers and the antennas and talking to the whole world.
Yeah, no, it's kind of crazy because I mean, I like you. I mean, I remember back in the day, you know, talking on. My dad had a CB there at the house, and we would talk to people, and I actually had some friends that we would talk to, because back then it was a party line, right? It was a phone. You couldn't be on the phone all the time, so if you wanted to talk to friends, sometimes you'd pick up the CB, and, you know, WXC 0841 Mad Russian, you know, kind of thing. I mean, I remember the call sign and everything. I mean, it's just like one of
Yeah,
those things where it was very, you know, it was just something that kept you connected. And of course, like you said, once you get into the beyond the CB into some of the HF stuff and the different things. So I guess break that down for us first. You know, ham
sure.
radio is broken down into various categories. And I think I want to talk about, and you kind of gave me an outline here, but, you know, you could break it down into different categories: local
Sure.
communications, which is like 50 miles, you know, regional communications, which could cover, you know, 1,000 miles, the whole state, and then worldwide, which is the HF that you just mentioned, how that opened up the world for you. So let's let's break down the idea of, and of course, we want to bring it back to this idea of having communications in an emergency type situation where maybe the cell towers are down or the power's down or both, or, you know, something like that.
Sure.
So, you know, let's talk a little bit about ham radio in its infancy, what it means, what it is, and then how we can apply it.
Okay, great. Yeah, you broke it down very succinctly with the three different regions, and there's no, like weapons, firearms. You can't buy one gun and do everything with it. You can't shoot close up birds with a sniper rifle. I mean, maybe you can, but it's not suited for it.
Right.
Radio is kind of the same thing. You've got your handhelds, yeah, 30 miles, 50 miles with a repeater. That's for regional, close up, car to car, maybe your house to somebody within the Fairbanks or the Anchorage area. And those little HTs are great, but you're not going to talk around the world with one of those. So uh, definitely you want to have the right equipment. And just like firearms, you got to have the more you have, the better.
Right.
So,
For you, yeah, and nobody, not everybody's going to dive into the deep end of the world. I mean,
no,
we look at the equipment that's around you, and for those of you who are on the radio, Kevin again looks like he's at the console of the space station here, with all the different bells and whistles and computer screens and everything around it. You've jumped into the deep end of the pool, right? But you started off in the small end, like you said, just driving with your friends, looking for the things, using the small little what they call 2-meter
yeah.
handheld units. And so let's talk about the basics of ham radio. First of all, who can participate? Who can be a ham radio enthusiast?
Well, anybody can, but the FCC does license us to use those frequencies. The FCC gives out allocations, and we're self-policing for the most part to keep the bands clean and working well. The call sign KL1PJ was assigned to me back in 2005, and most ham radio operators will wear that like a second name and use it all the time. So
Right.
you identify yourself constantly on the air, and that is how you especially on the HF bands talking worldwide. Luckily for us, English is the language of ham radio. So if I'm talking to somebody in Ukraine, they're speaking English, which I have. I've got probably 18, 20 contacts inside Ukraine just this year. And we log all that. It's there's legal things to it, as well as just keeping a nice neat shack. I have my logbook, and I've got I'm pushing 8,000 contacts that I've logged on there currently. The HF bands are great. With a wire antenna and 100 watts, you can pretty much talk around the world. And I have actually accomplished quite a few goals with that. Worked all states, worked all continents. There's quite a few competitions you can get in on for fun. The main thing is practice. If you're wanting to get into amateur radio for emergency communications, it's just like buying a firearm, and you don't buy a firearm, put it in the drawer until you need it.
Right.
You practice. There's so many aspects to amateur radio than just picking up and keying a mic. Understanding the propagation at different times of the day, different times of the year. After this solar storm we just had, there's no propagation sometimes. So,
Right.
yeah, practice makes perfect, and that's what we do with our hobby. We talk about our hobby on our hobby.
Right, exactly. Well, and I think that's the thing, people want to remember something. People want to take something and say, like you said, I want to buy it, get what I need, and then put it in a box and not have to think about it until an emergency. And that's a danger, whether it's cooking with your food storage so that you understand how your food storage works, that you can't just wait till the emergency to try and figure it out, or using your firearm, not being proficient with it. If the emergency comes and, now you got to try and figure out how to train yourself with it and everything else in the middle of a crisis. The same thing goes with, again, ham radio is you've got to know how to use it instead of, hey, is this thing on? Can you hear me now? Kind of thing.
Absolutely.
And
as far as being in the deep end, no, I am not in the deep end, Michael. I'm still in the shallow end. There's so many aspects to this hobby that you can get into. The weather balloons that we send up for APRS tracking, Earth, Moon, Earth. One of my buddies here in North Pole just put up an antenna 2 weeks ago. So that's basically aiming an antenna at the moon and bouncing a signal off of it so that anybody with a similar setup on planet Earth that can see the moon would be able to communicate. There's satellites. We have amateur radio satellites. You can get deep into with satcoms, and that is also worldwide.
You're scaring people now, okay? You're scaring all the straight people right now. They're all like, "Whoa, we're getting way too deep." So when we come back, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to break this down just a little bit, and we'll get started from the very beginning. Talk to me like I'm 5, and
Okay.
walk me through what I need to know about basic ham radio operation, and we'll talk about the local stuff, those up to 50 miles.
Sure.
And then maybe we'll break off into the regional so we can talk to people around the state. Kevin Tennant is our guest. We're talking about ham radio in the case of emergency and what you need to know. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay, Kevin Tennant, our guest. We're here in the chat room right now during the commercial break. We're going through. I just dropped some links in the chat room, and only about half of them worked. I don't know why, but not all of them put up there. But the first one, hamstudy.org, did go up there. If there's anything else that you want to see there, you can just Google those. You can do the anyway. You could check out those links and Google them for you. Let me see. Can I pull? Let me see if I can pull these bottom ones right here. There we go. I'll repost these. Hopefully these links come through for you so you can take a look at them. Those are the varying links that you should be able to see. There we go. Okay. Well, they didn't propagate. All right. Anyway, I have links. So if you have questions, you can send me links here. We'll get it squared away. So the big, this is the good one. Brian just says, I'll ask the question that's on everybody's mind now that the firearms analogy has been proffered. What is the evil black rifle of the ham radio world? Let me unmute you, Kevin. I'm sorry, I had you muted there for a second. Go ahead.
The evil black rifle of the ham radio world? Is that what he's asking?
Yeah, exactly. The EBR of the ham radio world. What is now that you've used the analogy, what is the thing like, oh, this is dangerous in the hands of human beings?
I don't know that there's anything dangerous about our hobby. Obviously, when you start getting into the HF bands and you've got a 1500 watt amplifier, like this box behind me here, you can get burnt, shocked, electrocuted. That's 2000 volt system right there, putting out 1500 watts to an antenna. So yeah, I guess there's aspects where you could hurt yourself, but no, there's no evil black gun. Maybe the sea beers that like to go and they're allowed to have 5 watts, and every once in a while you'll hear a sea beer that is like echoing around the world 7 times a second because they're putting out so many amps, just blasting. So,
I wanted to be sure I could be heard, so I just turned up. I just cranked up the power. Brian says, said another way, the same question: what does the government fear in for ham? I mean, what are they afraid of? People talking about things, people sharing the truth. I mean, what I like about the idea of ham radio is that it's unfiltered as far as information. You could be getting information directly from the source. You were just talking about Ukraine.
Yes,
you're getting information directly from the source out there.
That is absolutely correct. And no, I don't think the government's afraid at all of that. They've never indicated that they're going to cut our frequencies back if we talk to foreign countries. It's very open, very honest. Yeah, you find very little politics on the airwaves. Extremely little politics, no cursing. Again, it's self-regulated, so it's a very professional environment most times of communicators on the air. So no, I don't think the government is worried about us in any way, shape, or form. We've provided vital links during emergencies too many times for them to throttle us back.
Well, I mean, I guess that's good. That would be the first time ever. If they don't worry about something that the citizenry does. I'm just popping some questions here in the chat room, just marking them here. Gary says, the late, great Bob Ball got me into amateur radio back in the 90s. I let my license lapse, but have all my receivers for that emergency use. I mean, and in that case, as long as you know how to use it, I guess that's okay, because at least you know how to use it and everything else. I don't think in an emergency anybody's going to be checking your checking your license at that point. You know, it's
Correct.
it's crazy with that. All right, we're coming up on it here. We're going to get started in the basics, and we're going to continue. Kevin Tennant is our guest. Please like and share, like and subscribe, ring the bell, send out all the stuff to all the people, let other people get involved in the conversation. Here we go. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Kevin Tennant, again, our guest. Ham radio is the subject. Let's figure it all out. Here we go.
Public enema number one. Oh, wait, sorry. Enemy. Public enemy number one, which makes more sense. On the other hand, he's a little bit of a pain in the Michael Duke Show.
That's right. Pain in the something or other. That's what I am right here. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio. Kevin Tennant is our guest. He's a friend of mine who has been a ham radio enthusiast for a few years, and I couldn't think of anybody who would be better suited in my circle of friends to give us a little bit of a breakdown and lead us by the hand into the world of ham radios, especially for emergency situations and what-if scenarios. So, Kevin, again, like I said earlier, talk to me like I'm 5. I'm interested in getting a ham radio set up for my family for an emergency situation. So I'm traveling and I want my wife to be able to get a hold of me no matter what. Or, you know, I want my kids who don't live at the home to be able to contact us and in an emergency situation where maybe the power's out or the cell phones are down. There's no internet. I mean, you know, any combination of those things. So what am I looking at as a brand fresh new spanking guy that has no idea? What should I be looking at for that local communication? What do I need to do?
Okay, so for local communication, you're going to want to get on to 2 meter, 70 centimeter, maybe 6 meter. And those are radios that you can fit inside of a handheld if you're watching. Very small, half the size of a brick, maybe a quarter the size of a brick in some cases. They're 5 watts. You're allowed to go up to 100 watts on 2 meters for like a inside your vehicle. So a more robust radio would be running off of your vehicle's power with an antenna on the roof of the vehicle versus inside.
When you say 2 meter, what do you mean? Break that down for us. When you say on the 2 meter, tell us exactly what the 2 meter,
so
70 centimeter, 6 meter.
Yeah, there's band allocations that the FCC gives us and sets of frequencies that we can use. 2 meters is one of them that we use a lot for just local communications. You get up to 10 meter and 12 meter, 15, they go all the way up to 180 meter. And they're just sections of that band. And each one has different propagation for day or night, different times of the year. Requires larger antennas or smaller antennas to be resonant. I've got a stack of books, probably 8 inches tall, that just talks about antennas. And you can spend your whole career learning about antennas. But for the average ham that just wants to talk to their family, you're going to want to get into something that's in your vehicle that uses the local repeaters. A lot of repeaters have emergency backups with them, as well as the ability to go point to point from one ham to another without the use of a repeater. Regionally, inside the state of Alaska, we have something every night called Sniper Net. It's on 80 meters, and that is a inside the state net, roll call net that they do every night. They've been doing it every night since, I think, 1976. So it's a very long-lasting net. There's a lot of folks on it, and you can pass messages, and it is fun to get on there every night because you can see how well the propagation is. Sometimes you can't get over the mountains, but most times with a simple wire antenna and 100 watts, I am something called INVIS, which is near vertical incidence skywave propagation. You're bouncing off the atmosphere and coming back down in a large cone about 800 miles around. Right. And with that, I'm able to talk to Valdez, I'm able to talk to Juneau, all over the Kenai Peninsula, as well as the entire interior. So you have that kind of an antenna setup, which is easily deployable or set up at your home that would be interstate for communications. And it's very interesting. Every night there's messages being passed along, as well as the ability to help a message. If you can't hear Valdez, but somebody in Anchorage can, they'll pass along that message for you.
Right. It's
Does
like
that make
relay.
sense?
Right? It's like,
Yeah,
it's
they'll
like
relay.
Yeah, they'll
Yep.
relay the message. You
Mhm.
know, for John and Bob down in Bristol Bay, I've got a message from Kevin that says, you know, the tomatoes are doing fine, or
Yep.
whatever it is. They could pass that message on. So
You commented about my computers. I have a small 12-volt computer that travels with me in my vehicle. I can actually send and receive emails over HF. So
right.
if I don't have access to the web and I have my radio, I can actually send and receive emails using HF.
Yeah, that's kind of a nifty thing you got ahead of me there, because that's something I wanted to point out, is that you can do these semi-digital communications with you know, either plain text or emails or things like that can now be sent over these units.
Yep.
Does that require what does that require as far as you know, equipment, specialized things? I mean, what does it take if somebody wants to be able to do something like that?
Okay, so for my mobile unit, you can pick up a really nice mobile unit that will do from 6 meters up to 180 meters and 100 watts. With that inside your vehicle and the proper antenna, you can send and receive emails like that, as well as talk globally with the proper antenna. Some antennas, you know, if you're parked, you can put a taller antenna on versus driving down the road with a whip. But I have talked to Australia from my truck. Um, I was near Cantwell. I remember it very well, in that big open area in the past there, and talking from Alaska all the way to Australia with a whip antenna on my truck. So with that kind of equipment, you're spending about $1,000, maybe 1,500, 2,000, depending on antennas.
Right. So 6 meter, 70 up, you know, up to a 2 meter, up to 6 meter, up 70 mil, you know, all these different
Yep,
things. That's all the wavelength of the signal, right? I mean,
correct.
that's what it designates.
That's the length of the wavelength, how far light travels, and it makes one complete cycle. So it travels 2 meters for that complete cycle, versus 180 meters would be how far that signal would travel for it to complete one cycle in its frequency.
And so, again, if your head hurts already, this is what I discovered when I started to dive into the world of ham radio, that there's a lot of technical stuff that you could be. Let's say that I'm not interested in necessarily all the technical aspects of it, Kevin. I mean, you are and this is a compliment, you are a nerd, right? I mean, you
Yes.
are like a radio nerd. You love it.
Yeah.
Specific things. But if I just said, look, I want to understand the basic principles, but really what I want is just to have it to use. So you held up that little handheld
Yep.
2 meter radio there. So
Yes.
what would I need as somebody who just wants to, like I said, keep my family in the loop? What do I need to get to begin with? I mean, obviously, I have to have a license first
Your
and foremost.
technician license,
Right.
correct. That's the entry level. It's not a hard test to pass. You do have to have a little bit of knowledge about the rules and regulations and how radios work, just so you know how to plug things in and safely use 100 watts of power in your vehicle. So there is a little technical you got in to just to get started. But the technician license is an entry level. It doesn't require code, which is Morse code, to get into that. So that would be step one. And then finding yourself an Elmer, which is what we refer to from the old days as your guide in radio. So I have an Elmer. His name is Eric, and he does a phenomenal job of making me feel welcomed into the community, but also very stupid, because this guy he's worked on harp. He's worked on so many big things. So you say you want to get into it, you don't want to get into the technical aspect, but it just sort of happens, whether you want to or not.
Right.
But yeah, your technician license will get you at least communicating on 2 meters up to 10 meters, and handhelds, as well as a mobile unit in your vehicle. So you would have access to the repeaters, as well as point to point, radio to radio with other hams So
Right.
that's your entry level as your technician.
And you sent me a link to a website called hamstudy.org, which is a
Yes.
general class for ham radio practices, flashcards. They actually have the tests on this. They give you quizzes. They do all, but these are exactly the same questions that you'll be asked on a standard test anyway,
Correct.
right? So this
Yep.
teaches to the test, gives you all the information you need. Okay, so let's say that I passed. I went to hamstudy.org. I got all the stuff that I needed. I figured out just enough to be dangerous with it. And I've got the license. They've given me my call sign. I'm good to go. Then what do I need? What do I need then?
You take out your credit card and you go on to DX Engineering and you buy the radio that your Elmer recommended to get you started.
Right. I can feel my pocketbook going sprawling already. It is that something as simple as the handheld that you have there? Because I've seen the Baofangs
Yes.
and a lot of the different ones, and maybe I don't want to buy the latest and greatest, but I want something that I know works. And would it be simple point to point communications at that point? Would I be able to have two handhelds that talk to each other within a 50-mile radius and be able to do that? Or is that, what do I need?
No, absolutely correct. Now, I don't want to get into the Baofeng versus ICOM. The price points, you can go online and you can look. You can buy a Baofeng for $25, or I can buy one of these ICOMs for $400. There is a completely night and day difference between a $25 radio and a $400 radio.
Well, sure.
It's like buying a cheap firearm and an expensive one.
I can buy a Palmetto Armory AR-15, or I can buy a Daniels Defense AR-15, right? I mean, back to the gut, I know that one is not necessarily as good as the other, but will it get me through is the question.
Yes, it will. It will get you on the air, and which is exactly how I started, which is on the 2-meter band with a very small antenna on my truck and a very inexpensive radio. Got me started. Same thing with the handhelds.
So if I had my license and I had a couple of handhelds, whether they're the $30 ones or the $400 ones, I should be able to talk on a point on your prescribed frequency. I should be able to talk to people in my area within a 40 or 50-mile radius, generally speaking, no problem, point to point.
Yes. It with the proper elevation and antenna, you can go 100 miles. With the right antenna and line of sight, you can talk to the space station with a handheld on 5 watts. So it's just a matter of setting for where you're at. If you're in a deep valley, that's just one of the limitations of radio. The higher frequencies, like 2 meters, will not go through a mountain. It won't go over it. It just stops. So your terrain is huge.
Right. And you mentioned it earlier. The antenna is super important, right? I mean, you could have a $30 handheld radio, but if you have $1,000 antenna, you can make that $30 radio travel, a long ways compared to, if you had a $400 radio and no antenna, it might be better to put the money in the antenna at that point. Is that kind of part of this whole thing?
Absolutely. The first thing you do when you buy one of these handhelds, again, if you purchase it, it comes with what they call a rubber duck antenna. The first thing you do is you take that off and throw it away because they're worthless. They're compromised antennas. They're just too small. Hamstudy.org sells a larger whip antenna. It's very, very easy to use, and that's how they fund their operations online for their training is with these little antennas they sell. And you'll see that if you go onto hamstudy.org, you'll see the opportunity to purchase one of those. And again, it's an entry level. The ARRL has an entry level program. That's one of the links I gave you. That's where you would go to buy books. They have an amazing library of books. And then take your practice tests on there as well and information. But yeah, the ARRL is the American Radio Relay League. They have a lot of resources.
This, like I said, the deeper that I got into this subject, the more I realized I definitely needed a guide. I needed an Elmer. I guess you're my Elmer in this situation to walk me through this stuff, even just for some of the basics. But again, for your emergency situation, it's it's preparedness is great, but practice is also required on this kind
That
of
is
stuff.
huge. That
Yeah.
I can't emphasize that enough. I read so much information. I took the tests. I got my general upgrade. But the HF bands, the more I used them, the better I got. Because I had friends here locally that were making contacts and making contacts. I want to talk about Parks on the Air too before we have to go. But Parks on the Air got me very interested. But the practice, I was able to get further and further with the same equipment and make even more contacts further away across the oceans, just by practicing and learning about propagation and which frequencies to use at which times.
Kevin Tennant is our guest. We're going to continue here in just a moment. We're talking about ham radio for emergency uses and some of the basics of what you need. Again, you can go to hamstudy.org if you want to figure out what it takes to get your license, which, again, would help you have that practice that you may need, that you do need if you're going to use it in an emergency situation. That's for sure. All right, we return. One final segment. We'll talk about Parks on the Air and other stuff. We'll answer some questions from the chat room as well right after this.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes on Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay. Kevin is our guest. I've got some questions here that I've queued up. We'll ask them when we get back on the air. I'm just going back through here. Brian says, this is tough at this hour of the morning. I mean, it is. It's a deep, deep subject. Sandy says, ask him to name his radio brands. He just mentioned a couple of them. Obviously, Baofeng is at the bottom of the his quality pile, as far as, that's the consumer grade Walmart version. And then you've got the Icom, which you said is the same thing, only it's 10 times as much. So what are the name brands that you recognize or would recommend for folks who don't want to necessarily, take out a second mortgage, but may want to just get involved and dabble a little bit to see if it's for them?
I would say ICOM, Yaesu, and Kenwood are probably the top, all made in Japan. The Baofengs are made in China. And yeah, there is definitely a huge difference. But yeah, you can get on the air with the Baofengs. You can also listen to a lot more frequencies than you can transmit on, which is another aspect to amateur radio as well as emergency communications, is being able to listen. Shortwave listening is huge, and you can do that with a very inexpensive shortwave radio. You basically get on the air bands with that. But the ICOM is the one I chose because I had an ICOM radio. That was one of the first ones that was given to me a long time ago. So that was the first one I looked at, and I fell in love with the ICOM radios just because of the ease of use. But the Yaesu, Kenwood, they all make equally good radios. There's not a battle between the different brands, if you will.
No.
There's quite a few people love their Yaesus. I have a Yaesu handheld, and then all of my HF radios are ICOMs.
Right. Well, and again, each one, you remember, like you said, each firearm has a different use. Each, you're not trying to shoot ducks with a scoped rifle, and you're not trying to shoot caribou from 150 yards away with a shotgun, right? That's just how.
Correct.
Each one's got its use. And even in the beginning, even if you choose to use something like a Baofeng or something to begin with, just to get your feet wet, that's not a bad thing. Just don't expect it to be the highest quality in the world, right? And like you said, you could just be listening more than transmitting.
That is definitely true. And the quality comes in the ability to discern the signals, because you're amplifying this thing. That the voltage on your antenna, you're amplifying tens of millions of times to get a signal out of your radio. So the electronics is hugely important when you're talking about amplification on that level.
Kevin Tennant is our guest. Frank asks the question, why does it require a test and or licensing? Why do we have to, why what's the deal there? This is, they're from the government and they're here to help, or what's the reasoning?
In this case, the FCC actually performs one of the most important roles the government can do, which is just to regulate the frequencies so you don't interfere with other frequencies. There's some hugely important things going on around us in the RF world all the time, every day. You want your tire pressure sensors to communicate with the computer on your car. You don't want your ham radio to interfere with something like that. There's hospital equipment, there's medical equipment that people wear in their bodies. You don't want to interfere with that. You could kill them. So when you're dealing with RF, you don't want to interfere with other uses like the military channels. We're allowed to use 30 meters, but a very small section of it, because the military has frequencies on both sides of that you don't want to interfere with. So the FCC has granted us certain blocks of communications, and they've been very kind. I mean, we can basically use from 2 meters up to 180 meters, which covers a lot of the spectrum. And we just have certain blocks we're allowed to use. So no, I don't feel the FCC is out to get us on this one. They also work with foreign countries so that they're also not interfering with our communications. Does that make sense?
So it becomes kind of an international standard of civilians talk on these X frequencies so that they're not running into other types of communications. Or
correct. I mean, if I can tune in and listen to the different 40 channels on CB radio, and when propagation is good, they're basically echoing around the world, and they call it the chicken band because it's just a madhouse. There's just splattering and noise and echoes. It's crazy. Then you go down to 10 meters, which is on amateur, and it's polite. It's regulated and works.
It's quiet. It's quieter, and it's like a raucous room versus a polite conversation in a library, right? It's
correct.
Kind of the two different
correct.
things. All right, Kevin Tennant is our guest. We're talking about ham radio for emergency uses. Again, I've dropped some links earlier, and we can continue on with that. We're going to jump into this Parks on the Air, and then we're going to talk about some questions that we have coming up. So we're going to ask those questions as well. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Here we go.
The Michael Duke Show. Seriously humorous with a pinch of intellect. Sorry. That is humorous. Here's Michael Dukes.
Well, I had to have a pinch of intellect to know that I had no idea what I was doing with ham radio. So that's why I asked Kevin to come on and just kind of straighten us out a little bit, give us a little bit of background here. Again, we were talking about what do you need as a setup for a family. Well, first of all, you need a license to test it and to run with it. What's the cost or something like that, Kevin? If I go to hamstudy.org and I study the test, what does it take? What's the cost involved in doing something like that? Let's say I cheaped out and just bought, the cheapest thing I could get, a Baofeng or whatever. And it's, I'm $30 or $50 into each radio. So I've got 2 or 3 radios for $150. And I bought some antennas to make them a little bit better. So maybe I'm into it for a couple $100. What does it take to get the license? What are we talking about for the basic investment of emergency communications?
Time, mostly, I would say, is the number one investment you're going to make, because it's only $25 for your license from the FCC. And that's just recent. For the last 100 years, they've been free. They just raised the price to, I think it's $25. And then a couple $100 of radios. I have a box of radios. So if somebody was to come to me and want to learn, there's a better than good chance that somebody's going to get a radio for free that I've collected from other hams or over the years. So I've got a box full of, I think I've got 4 or 5 2-meter radios that somebody would, all they'd have to do is just ask.
Right. So find your Elmer, and maybe you'll end up with a free radio. Like you said, you ended up with your first radio was somebody gave you as an ICOM, and away you go. talk about parks on the air.
Love
For a
to.
second.
That has brought this hobby to the forefront for so many people. It's emergency communications, pure and simple, because that's what you're doing. Is I got a backpack here. For those that are able to see, this is everything I need, antenna wise, cable wise. All I have to do is take a radio, put it in the top part of that I have sitting behind me, and a power supply, and carry that up to the highest mountain. They have SOTA, which is summits on the air, as well as POTA, which is parks on the air. And you go set up on a bench inside the boundaries of the park, and people hunt you from all over the world. That's the funnest part of this hobby, is to set up. You spot yourself. There's a spotting page that you can go on to the POTA website, and if you don't spot yourself, somebody will spot you that's hunting and hears you. And you have to make 10 contacts, which is generally pretty easy to do, but not guaranteed. And it's just an absolute blast. Alaska is one of the most sought after states, I believe, behind Hawaii. So if you want to have worked all states, which is an award that is given, as well as just bragging rights to say that you talk to someone from each state, I get pileups every time I go out and activate a park. There's a group of 20 people constantly trying to contact me for hours. Sometimes it's a lot of fun.
So this is the hide and seek of the radio world, essentially.
Yeah.
Like Ollie Ollie Oxford, here I am, come find me kind of thing.
So I set up my solar panel. I have a little solar panel that I built, and I have a battery, and then just plug into my my radio, and then set up. I have several different antennas, of course. Some as simple as a wire tossed in a tree. I've got a slingshot with that I can just shoot a wire up into a tree, and there you go, instant antenna. And I've done that parks all the way down to Wasilla, into Big Lake area. I've done a lot of activated quite a few parks down that way, as well as the local ones here.
And so then people just search you out, try to contact you, and then they log it, right? I mean, this is they log it out. And so this is a good way to test your mettle, test your skill, and again, be involved in that community as well.
Absolutely fun.
All right. Let me ask some of the questions that have come up in
Sure.
the chat room. Barbara asks, how is ham radio different from shortwave, or are they the same thing?
Shortwave is a term mostly used for listening on shortwave radio. Those are megawatt stations that are broadcasting around the world, and you have a shortwave radio, which is the term for that particular band. You can also use an amateur radio to receive signals on all kinds of frequencies outside of where you're allowed to broadcast from. Just because you only have a small block of the 20-meter band doesn't mean you can't go up and down from there and listen to other frequencies. So shortwave is just a term most people use for listening versus amateur radio, which may overlap frequencies with shortwave. Does that answer?
Yeah, and so it's more about receiving. I mean, it's more about receiving than it is about transmitting, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Right. And by the way, you don't have to have a license if you just want to listen, right? That's not
correct. You can buy a very expensive radio that is capable of broadcasting, and you can use it just to listen, which is probably 90% of amateur radio is listening, not talking.
Is a great question. Is there any way to authenticate radio communications? And I guess that means to make sure that you are who you say you are, or you are where you say you are, kind of thing.
Beyond using our call signs, which are easily looked up on QRZ, that again, we're self-policing. So if somebody is broadcasting out of band, they'll get called out. They'll get an email probably, because our emails are also on QRZ. There's always pirates. They don't come up very often, but every now and then you'll hear somebody that you just know he's a pirate and he's broadcasting and he shouldn't be. It doesn't happen very often though. But as far as authenticating, like a licensed ham to a licensed ham, other than the call sign, there is no form of authentication. No.
How are sunspots affecting the radio? Are they affected by weather, by sunspots, by solar flares, by magnetic storms? What give us a little bit of a rundown there.
Sure. If the northern lights are out, the radio's off. It is I mean, there are bands you can get around. You can also bounce 2-meter and 6-meter signals off of the Aurora, which is interesting. We were doing that just this last go around because the HF bands will be completely blacked out sometimes. And that goes for the airliner going across the ocean as well as the amateur radio trying to talk across the ocean. When the sunspots are great. High sunspot numbers mean we're getting a lot of the correct kind of radiation to ionize the different layers of the atmosphere, which gives us skips and longer propagation. But it also means solar flares. And when a geomagnetic storm like hit Friday, there was absolutely zero signals that I could send or receive at certain times of the day. Just absolute gone.
Shut you down.
Yep.
Ron asks, will these radios work out in the middle of nowhere, 80 miles from any type of tower or town? Can you do that with the radios that you have?
Yes, absolutely. Most of us pride ourselves on being able to just go antenna to antenna without any other infrastructure. The repeaters I was referring to earlier on 2 meters, sometimes 6 meters and 70 centimeters, those rely on a tower. Other than that, there is absolutely no infrastructure out there required for the level of communications we use on HF.
Kevin Tennant, our guest. Kevin, I appreciate you coming on. We're down to the last 60 seconds. Any final thoughts here for people who might be interested in jumping in just for emergency use?
Just for emergency use, again, find somebody that wants to teach you, which most of us are very eager to teach new people. We enjoy it very much. It's a part of our hobby that's very enjoyable, is teaching. Find somebody that wants to help you, and that's easy to do. There's clubs. I also gave links. Join one of the clubs, get to know some people. You'll get to use someone else's equipment first. I would welcome somebody to come in my shack and we can talk on it. Welcome somebody to come in my vehicle. We can use that radio as well and learn from somebody that's already doing it. That would probably be my number one thing. Just find somebody.
That was just dipping your toe into the edge of the ham world, folks. And as you can see, it could be as complicated or maybe as simple as you want it to be. Kevin Tennant's been our guest. We're out of time. We got more coming up. Nick Begich is up next. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Kevin. All right, Kevin. I love this because I want to make it simple, and man, you dive deep into stuff immediately, and that's the thing. It is. I mean, I went for a simple search on YouTube or on Google to find out more about ham radio for emergency use, and 2.5 hours later, my brain is like exploding, and I'm trying to grasp all these concepts. I mean, it can be as deep as you want it to be, right? But it is.
You better believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can dive into just antenna theory, and there's whole programming modeling software you can buy and experiment with different antennas, and yeah, it's not so.
I mean, people are cutting their own antennas to the certain length and doing everything in height, and I
built many of them.
Yeah, all I wanted to do was, how do I get a radio that could talk to somebody else, 50, 80, 100 miles away in the case of emergencies? And sometimes it's hard to find stuff that just dumbs it down for those of us that just want to.
It's so easily complicated.
Yeah, and it's easy to get overcomplicated. But I think you laid out some stuff for us there. If we get our license, we get a couple of 2-meter radios, we should be able to talk in a short amount of, in a short distances and everything else. But we got to go test it. You got to get it and then go test it to make sure everything works, right?
Correct.
Yeah. The question that everybody I know is asking right now is, are you out there checking out those number stations at night? Is that what you're doing, Kevin? Are you counting the numbers? Is that?
You can do that with a shortwave radio too. Those number stations are still on the air.
Yeah. It's crazy. I saw a video on that here the other day, the number of number stations that are still on the air doing whatever.
Because it works.
Yeah. Yeah. Who knows what they're saying, but it's something. The chair is against the wall. The chair is against the wall. It's interesting stuff. Well, Kevin, I appreciate it, my friend. As always, it's fascinating stuff. But again, maybe my head does hurt sometimes when I get into it. But we'll see if we can find people like you. The last place that you wanted to send people was the up in Fairbanks. It's the Arctic Amateur Radio Club.
Yep.
Up in Fairbanks in the interior. They have a Facebook page. And then also the Anchorage Amateur Radio Club, which is KL7AA.org, somebody's call sign there. And I got a bunch of other links as well. So, Kevin, thank you so much for coming on board this morning, my friend. It was,
I appreciate it.
It was
fun.
educational. It was educational for sure. All right, bud. We'll talk to you again soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. That's Kevin Tennant, our guest here this morning. Oof, man, I got to tell you. It's enough to make you go, what? So, but simply get your license, get some handhelds, go out there and test it. That's the simple and easiest thing you can do. For a couple $100, you can get a couple radios, some antennas, and your license, and then you can go check it out. So, Bill says my nerd nerve hurts this morning. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of stuff. But Kevin just gave you an example of what I discovered. As soon as I started to dive into it, the next thing you know, I'm up into frequency and oscillation and length, and I'm like, man, I just want to buy a radio to use it. So hopefully, we've dumbed it down a little bit for you there. We can continue on those discussions. All right. I see that we have Nick Begich is in the green room and he's ready to go. Let's pull him on board here to see what's happening. Hello, my friend.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing good. Are you all ready?
I'm all ready.
Good. We just nerded out a little bit on ham radio here in the beginning segment just to kind of get a feel for it. And maybe politics will be a little less complicated than the ham radio stuff, right?
I think in this case, probably yes.
Yeah.
I didn't catch all that segment, but I don't think I've seen someone with so much equipment in the background as
man, that's fun stuff. I mean, and he loves that stuff. And I'm just like, that is amazing. But I just hand me a radio. I just want to be able to use a radio. Let me figure it out. I got to go get my ham license and then we'll figure it out from there. All right, Nick. So you're ready to go. You've been busy. I saw that bear. Did we talk about the bear last time? I don't know if we did, but that was a big bear.
It was a good sized bear. We were very fortunate with the weather down in Kodiak. For folks who've been to Kodiak or been hunting on the island, you know that the weather often does not cooperate, but no rain down there this time. And that bear came out about 100 yards right on the beach and just dead stopped right there. And we were very fortunate. One shot, took it down, and blessed with a good sized bear. Had a 300 Win Mag, Kimber, Montana, just 190 grain. Accubon, and that's all it took. So
all it took, it just stepped out on the beach and said, "Shoot me," and you're like, right. "Okay, yeah, whatever you say, man, whatever you say, we'll do it to it." All right, well, Nick, let's get into this stuff here. We're going to continue here in just a sec. I'll put you back in the green room, and we'll be back to you here in just a minute. Okay?
Sounds good.
All right, we're about ready to jump back into this, folks. Please like and share, like and subscribe, ring the bell, do all the stuff. Let's get back to it. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Hour 2 continues with Nick Begich as our guest. Up next, let's get it on. Here we go.
Whoa, buddy, put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the internet at michaeldukeshow.com and across the state of Alaska on this your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the program. Hour 2 of the big radio show for this Monday edition. We just finished up with Kevin Tennant, who gave us a toe dip into the world of ham radio. We were talking about ham radio for emergency preparedness, and oh boy, there's a lot of stuff in there that we got into. You can go back and listen to it on the podcast if you'd like, or on the replay on Facebook or YouTube. Some interesting stuff, but it was a good hour and fast. But that brings us up to hour 2 this morning, where we are now joined by candidate for U.S. Congress, the U.S. House of Representatives, Nick Begich III. He comes on board to talk with us about his candidacy and everything else that's happening out there. Let's jump over to him right now. Good morning, Nick. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Good morning. How are you?
You know, no complaints, my friend. I just, like I said, my brain hurts a little bit trying to dissect and integrate all this ham knowledge that we just got. But let's move on over to you. You've had a busy couple weeks, my friend. You were down seen with the Jet Set crowd, whining and dining down in the Mar-a-Lago, and the next thing I know, then you got an endorsement from the Freedom Caucus. And give us a rundown of what's been going on the last couple weeks here for you.
Well, it has. It's been very busy. We did the Republican convention, as you mentioned off air there just a minute ago. I was down in Kodiak and was blessed to get a brown bear. Came back. We had a couple of events in Anchorage, and then zipped right down to Palm Beach. I've been endorsed by Congressman Byron Donalds, and he was gracious enough to host an event for me down there. And then went over to Mar-a-Lago and saw the president give some remarks, and met with some other members of Congress, both on the Senate and the House side. And yeah, so from there went to D.C., met with some other representatives, including Representative Pete Stauber. For those who've been really paying close attention to the news cycle the last couple of weeks, you'll remember that the House passed something called the Alaska's Right to Produce Act. And the Alaska's Right to Produce Act, interestingly, was authored by a member from Minnesota, a gentleman named Pete Stauber. And he had received that bill had been co-sponsored by Mary Peltola, but at the last minute, she decided she didn't like the bill.
Right.
Wrote a letter to her colleagues, called a Dear Colleague letter, saying, please vote no for the bill that she had previously co-sponsored. And then when the bill finally came up on the floor, she voted present. So not only did she not vote yes, as she intended, and then no, as she recommended everyone else, she voted present. So
that's called having your cake and eating it too. It's trying to split the political baby, right? I mean, that's what was going on there.
It's unbelievable. I mean, it's a profile in a lack of courage. So I reached out to and I met with Representative Pete Stauber. I thanked him on behalf of Alaska and Alaskans everywhere for having the foresight and the courage to take a bill that had nothing to do with his state and everything to do with ours to the floor and work that bill and pass it out of the House. You know, we all know how important resources are in Alaska. if we didn't have a robust resource program, we'd have a very high state income tax. We'd probably have a state sales tax as well. We've been blessed with tremendous resources, and we all know the Biden administration's been doing every single thing they can to shut the state's ability to develop down. So met with Representative Pete Stauber. He was, let's just say, miffed at the lack of support that he received from our member of Congress. But
that's the polite way of saying it. He's a little miffed, a little hacked off. Yeah, a little hacked off.
Yeah. So met with some other members, including a friend of yours, somebody that you and I admire, Thomas Massey, and had a great conversation with him. He does wear the debt clock. If anyone's curious, he does have that clock. He has a clock that connects. He told me this himself, to the U.S. Treasury's website via Wi-Fi, and updates the U.S. debt, and it literally will run right there on his lapel. And he had that. He showed me that. But really fascinating guy. Very focused on making sure that we get our fiscal house in order, and did have an opportunity to meet with the members of the House Freedom Caucus and receive their endorsement, as you mentioned a moment ago.
Which has got to be gratifying. I mean, they just don't pass them things out like candy, right?
No.
This is a whole new deal, and this is the crowd that I want to see Nick Begich run with in Congress. Is those cats who are trying to bring some fiscal sanity and again maintain freedom here in the United States for that.
I'll tell you what. This is a group of folks in the House that are focused on the United States Constitution, ensuring that the work that they're doing results in smaller, limited government, a government that is contained within the confines of its constitutional lane. And I think that's great. I think we need far more members like that if we're going to rein in spending and we're going to rein in federal overreach. And it's something that is talked about every day on this show. How do we go about doing it? Well, it's up to the people. The people have to elect members of Congress who are committed to those principles when they get down to DC. And it's going to take a lot of work, but there's a group there that is working hard. There's about 41 members in that group right now, and looking to expand the ranks so that we can actually make real demonstrable progress on these objectives.
Thomas Massey wearing the debt clock has got to be kind of, demoralizing, depressing when you look at that and you just see that thing cranking over and over again. But I mean, most Americans are really not paying attention to that. It's unfortunate, but if there's one thing that will bring down the republic, Nick, in my mind, that's it. That's the thing that will bring the republic down. I mean, we've been around for 245 years, 50 years, but I mean, this is the thing that could bring us down right now. And the worst part is, it's a problem that's completely solvable if we had the intestinal fortitude to actually make it happen.
That's right. I tell people all the time, this is, the inflation that we're experiencing today is not a private sector phenomenon. The private sector is incentivized through competition to drive prices down over time, and the innovations that we benefit from on a daily basis, whether that relates to agriculture technology that's increased yields, or the ability to communicate like we're communicating now. These things drive tremendous productivity gains through the economy. The only reason that we don't see actual deflation is because of our fiscal and monetary policy. So has nothing to do with the private sector. The private sector is driving prices down and the ability to have a greater life with greater consumption up. It's the government that's creating this inflationary environment, and it's the government that needs to be contained. If we can do that, oh my gosh, we would have an even better life than we have today, and we live like kings relative to human history today.
Right,
so
right.
So really, it's about reigning in government. When you look at every significant empire over all of history, you see that the most common pathway to sort of self-implosion is this. It's an abuse of the monetary system. And Rome is often used as one of the most common examples. They started debasing their currency. So it used to be that their coinage had 100% silver, right? And their most common coinage. And they started to reduce the percentage of silver until by the end of the Roman Empire, there was virtually no silver at all in the coinage that was used. And it was necessary for them, in their view, in their government's view, to do this because they wanted to expand the money supply so they could fight more wars and spend more money from the treasury. Well, eventually, the spending power of those equivalent dollars, those units of currency, was greatly diminished, and it had a major impact in reducing the power base of that government and those people.
Well, you talk about the free market. I mean, like you said, the free market drives competition. The free market, that competition then drives pricing down. I mean, there is no inflationary gap. I love how a lot of the elites now are blaming, Kellogg's and Frito-Lay and everything else for being greedy. That's why they're doing this shrinkflation thing, because, they're just greedily trying to gob more money on. Well, the inflation wasn't, look at pre-COVID numbers. The inflation number was completely different, but it was after that they added the trillions of dollars to the system and to the debt that this thing started to run out of control. And I mean, that's a Trump problem as much as it is a Biden problem. But the problem is it's a government problem. That's the thing. They keep adding money to the money supply and they keep expanding. This is what you get. You get inflation. The history, again, is replete with instances of this happening, from Weimar to Zimbabwe to the Roman Empire. You could see it. As soon as you start to debase the currency, as soon as you start to abuse the monetary system, arithmetic takes over. And math don't lie, Nick. Math does not lie.
Math does not lie. Math wins in the end, as I like to say. You're 100% right. And like any politician, when something's their fault, they blame the other guy, right? So you won't see many. You'll see a few, but you won't see many of these people saying that it's their fault. You'll see everyone blaming somebody else, and the easiest scapegoat is going to be the private sector, the people who actually are producing. Remember, the government doesn't produce anything. They take from one group or individual and they give to another group or individual. And it's interesting when you meet the lobbyists, as one does when they're running for office. You meet these various people. These lobbyists, what you discover is they fill one of two roles. I've only ever met lobbyists that fill in one of these two buckets. One, they rely on government spending in order for their industry to exist. So they have a lobbyist to go out and make sure they get the most money, or that money continues. The second group is a group that requires protection through legislation in order to exist, because they can't generally handle the free market. They're looking for some protectionary component of the law that will allow them to continue, right? And so this is the beginning of many of the problems that we see manifest throughout government. Is what I call the influence layer has a set of incentives that are fundamentally misaligned to what generates that private sector productivity in the long run for the individual.
Nick Begich is our guest candidate for U.S. House. It's time to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will continue with Nick here in just a moment. We'll talk about some of the things that are going on in Congress right now and what he sees as solutions and why he thinks he's the best candidate for this job. We will continue The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio.
Running on 100% pure beard power. Oh, also some coffee. We dip our beard in coffee.
Ha, nice beard.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay, Nick Begich is our guest here on the program. Jim actually, I think, is nailing part of this, is that he says the state and the feds have built a dependency economy, and now people are the problem, which is 100% true in the state of Alaska, and I think true in part in the U.S. He also said, we the people keep asking the government to increase spending, hence bringing home the bacon. I mean, I mean, seriously, at this point, we are not even acknowledging that there is a problem. We keep acting like it'll never happen to us, right? Oh, sure, you can point to the Roman Empire. Sure, you can point to the Weimar Republic. Sure, you could point to Zimbabwe. Sure, you could point to fill in the blank with anybody. Argentina. It'll never happen to us because we're the world reserve currency and we're too big to fail and all these other reasons. But all those things can change. All of those things can change, and eventually, I mean, you can only be the world reserve currency up until the point to where you abuse the rest of the world too much with your currency status, and then that'll change.
That's true. I mean, when you go back in history and you look at who held the world reserve currency status before the United States, it was Great Britain, it was France, it was Portugal, it was Spain, right? Those nations have not gotten that status back. Once you lose it, it becomes almost impossible to regain. So you really do not want to lose it. I've said it 100 times. I'm going to say it 1,000 more times before the end of this campaign. We need to understand that as Americans, you walk into a Walmart, you walk into your garage, if you walk into your closet, tell me how much of that was made in the United States. Not much. Not much, if any. And the lesson here is we don't generally produce the things that we consume. The thing that we do produce is the United States dollar, which has a great level of desirability in the world. But if it loses that desirability, our standard of living will take a hit, a significant hit. And it's very important that we re-inject discipline into DC and get that budget number under control as a percentage of GDP. It can be done. People tell me all the time, oh, it's never going to happen. Why are you even trying? It can be done. It can be done. There are a lot of things that can be done. Number one, you can reduce the interest rate. For goodness sakes, our interest rate at 5% for the average of our government debt is generating about a $1.5 to $2 trillion run rate on interest payments alone in the next 12 months. So that's a huge component of our spending right now. There are entire departments like the Department of Education, which can and should be cut completely. And then we've got general efficiencies. I believe, that we could cut over the long haul a substantial portion of government employment over time, right? A proper glide path driving efficiencies through any organization should reduce in reductions. And what we've seen under the Biden administration is the complete opposite. We've seen a growth in the number of government employees. And I think, we need to expect the same thing out of government that we see in the private sector, which is greater efficiencies, the need for fewer individuals over the long horizon in order to achieve the same outcomes. So I think there are a lot of things that can and should be done. I think when Trump gets into office, we're going to see more of those things roll out. But there is a way to get this under control. But to your original point, Michael, it's up to the voters.
Yeah,
it's up to the voters.
Oh, we got to wake up to it. As fact, Josh is going to disagree with you, so I'm going to disagree with Nick about government not producing anything. It's the number one producer of red tape. I mean, they do produce regulation, but they are net consumers. We talk about that a lot on the program here. They really don't produce anything except for heartache. And
right.
that's
a lot of members believe, or a lot of folks believe that the job of a member of Congress is to go down to DC and pass more laws. And I think that is that is absolutely wrong. We don't need more laws. Anyone who's ever walked in or accidentally wandered in to a law library knows there's no way that one individual could be aware of all of the laws that we've managed to pass over the last 200 years. We don't need more laws. We don't need more legislation. We need less, in fact.
Yeah, we need less legislation, less regulation, allow the free market to work. That's what we need to do. All right, we're going to continue. Nick Begich.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
All right, we're continuing. Nick Begich is our guest, candidate for U.S. House. we were just talking again about the debt and how it's fixable. You actually had some solutions, Nick, that I think you could repeat, things that could actually be done, because people tell you, they'll look you in the face and they'll go, either one, they'll say, oh, that'll never happen to us, or because we're too big to fail, or they'll say it just can't be done, Nick. It's just you're tilting at windmills, Don Quixote. What do you say? What is your answer? You do have some solutions.
There are some solutions. One, we need to get those interest rates back under control. The interest rates that we have right now are generating about 1.5, maybe up to $2 trillion in future interest annual payments, and rising. That needs to be brought back down. That's one thing. The second thing, we need to eliminate entire departments. There are entire departments at the federal level that really, they have not existed for the bulk of the history of our country. One of those, Department of Education, created under the Carter administration. We don't need the federal government telling us how to educate our children. I think our states can figure that out. They did a great job of figuring that out for hundreds of years. We don't need that. And then we need to be expecting the same kind of efficiencies in government that we see played out in the private sector. Oftentimes you'll see organizations that are having a challenging time, they'll go through a round of layoffs and cuts and efficiencies and productivity projects that drive reductions in headcount over time. We need to expect the same sort of productivity gains in government. Under Joe Biden, we've seen significant increases in government employment, and we should be expecting the opposite as taxpayers. We need to actually expect to see a more efficient government over time, and one that reduces costs, not increases costs, particularly as a percentage of GDP.
Nick, some of the other things that we've been talking about, of course, is really catching a lot of people's attention, is the immigration issue. And the question of, look, we're a nation of immigrants, right? That's where we started. So immigration is always, part of America's DNA, should always be there. We should always, have a pathway for people to be able to come here and be citizens and everything else. But what people are concerned about, obviously, is this unfettered illegal immigration, people crossing the borders. We're seeing videos of boats running up on the beach in San Diego and other places, and the illegals, scampering out of the boats and things like that. These stolen vehicles that come up from Mexico or wherever. And of course, this problem that we seem to have, where there doesn't seem to be a lot of families that are coming up. It usually ends up being males of a certain military age. And whether you're a conspiracy theorist or not, it does make you scratch your head, go, well, where's all the families? Why is there always men who are 18 to 25 that seem to be crossing the border instead of everybody? What's going on with that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up. This is really important, and it's germane to some legislation that just passed the House last week. There's been a lot of talk, and I agree with this. There's no other explanation for it. The folks that are coming into our nation are being kept here by the Democrats and the Biden administration with intention. They have backed up the courts 5, 6, 7 years, right? Well, let's think about 5, 6, 7 years out. You have the 2030 census. The Biden administration has brought in, by some measures, 12 million folks that have come in to the United States illegally with the intention of staying here. Okay. And the Biden administration has given them EBT cards, free transportation, free healthcare, enrolling where there are kids in school. They have the ability to stay here while their claims are being adjudicated in these backed up systems. And what is happening is they want them to stay because in sanctuary states and cities, these people will be counted in the 2030 census. Now, why is that important? Because the 2030 census determines, as it does every 10 years, the apportionment of congressional members to a state. California is set to lose a number of representatives to states like Texas and Florida, where people have been moving in droves, right? And so if they're able to increase the number of residents residents, then they're able to increase the number of representatives that they will be given following the 2030
Right.
census. They're also able to, for the same reason, increase the number of electoral college votes that those states will be given post 2030. So this is a way, it's a mechanism for the Democrats to hold on to permanent power in the House and the presidency. And some would say, Nick, come on, that sounds ridiculous. How could you suggest that that is actually what's going on? Well, just last week, the House, under Republican majority, passed legislation disallowing non-residents from being considered when determining congressional appointments. But did you know that every single Democrat in the House voted against that legislation, including Mary Peltola?
Right. So that the apportionment would then count for illegals who are in the country when they report on the census. If you're
That's right.
Yeah. So they would have counted every illegal resident as part of that apportionment, and it could have allowed California to have millions of new immigrants in there to count against that for their congressional districting.
That's exactly right. And so for those who may have been holding out hope that this was just a giant misunderstanding, I assure you it is not. When every single Democrat in the entire United States House votes to allow non-citizens, illegals coming into our country to be counted to determine who gets electoral college votes, who gets representatives in the United States House, it's not a theory anymore. It's not a theory anymore. This is literally what is going on. And there isn't any rational explanation for it other than that. Look, these people need to be sent back to their country of origin. I agree with your opening remarks, Michael. Of course, we're a nation of immigrants. And of course, we need to have a robust, solid immigration program. But that program needs to legally vet people before they come in. They need to be people that we know that we need strategically as a nation. There needs to be a strategic plan for this. And there is. We have people, and they wait in line for, in many cases, far too long. We're talking, in some cases, a decade to become a citizen. Why are those people waiting a decade? These people, as you mentioned, run off the boat and right into the United States and are given a green card, able to work. There are people, good quality people around the world that would love to become American citizens. It would be strong patriots as Americans. Those are the people that we need to be bringing into this country.
Maybe we should emulate Mexico's immigration policy, or Nicaragua's immigration policy, or many of the immigration policies of these southern nations, where they wouldn't allow any of the things that we've got going on. They want to force them all up here and send them all to us. But if you tried it the other way around, that's a whole different kettle of fish.
Forget it. Yeah. And I'll tell you, for folks who've had the ability to do a little bit of travel in their lives, when you go to another country, you're there at their pleasure. This is someone else's nation. I cannot imagine trying to sneak in to somebody else's country without the proper documentation and authorization. That would be a crazy idea, right? Because you would expect that you would go to jail. You would expect that you would have problems, that you would be fined, that you would be deported, that you wouldn't be able to return. These are not things that law-abiding citizens would even consider doing. And so the people that are coming into our nation doing these things, the first act that they commit when they come into our nation is to break the law. And look, those aren't the sort of people that you want in the country, by and large.
Why do you hate children, Nick? Why do you hate children? I mean,
I'll tell you, people ask me, I've actually been asked that question on the campaign trail. And what I tell folks is you got to recognize that America is by far the most generous nation by any measure of any nation worldwide. The American people give more, both on a percentage basis and as a total quantum of dollars, to the rest of the world for all sorts of causes. But the United States can't solve all the world's problems. We can't. We don't have the capacity. We're 5% of the population. We can't fix the problems for 95% of the world. When we fought for our independence, when we fought for our nation, it cost us something. And if people want what Americans have in their nation, they're going to have to fight for it too.
Nick Begich is our guest, candidate for U.S. House. So what's the solution here, Nick? Is it a streamlining of the immigration process? Is it making it more open? Is it making it, is it dedicating more resources? And what do we do to the borders in the meanwhile to prevent this? I mean, there's videos of these guys jumping across the thing. I mean, wearing brand new 511 gear and all kinds of there's all kinds of stuff. So what do we do in the meanwhile? What's the combination move here?
I'll tell you, it's really up to because there's so much executive authority in the short to medium term that's been vested in the presidency. And so you saw under Trump a number of executive actions, among them the Remain in Mexico policy. That needs to be reinstated. Unfortunately, if Congress is not going to take that authority away from the president by passing laws that will force the Department of Homeland Security and others to do their job, then you're at the whim of that executive, right? So we've got to get Trump back in office. We've got to get other members of Congress in there that will pass permanent legislation to prevent this. We need to build the wall. Absolutely. People say walls don't work. And why does Nancy Pelosi have one around her house? They work. Walls work. We need barriers that will impede some of this. We've seen states like the state of Florida who have actually made it illegal to employ folks who are in the country illegally. And it's actually illegal to transport people in the state of Florida who are in the country illegally. It's a felony there. So we need some of the states to step up as well, because if you reduce the incentive to come here, if it's very difficult to work in the United States, to live in the United States illegally, then people will not come here as readily. So there are a number of actions that can happen at the federal level, the state level, but we've got to get the right people in those representative leadership roles in order to enforce the law.
And we've got to acknowledge the problem. That's the other thing. Without being treated like we're some kind of wild conspiracy theorist because we're pointing this out. I mean, 50,000 people from mainland China in the last 5 months were stopped at the border. What? Somebody should be asking questions about that. That's what I'm saying right there. Nick Begich is our guest. We're going to continue here in just a minute, and we'll be back. One final segment dead ahead with Nick. We'll continue the Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Make sure you like and share. Come on out. Join us on Facebook if you want to talk during the break. We'll be back with more right after this.
We're broadcasting live through a series of tubes.
Allowing all of these entities to provide streaming stuff going on the internet.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. Sorry. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
It's a series of tubes. It's a series of tubes, man. All right, Nick Begich is our guest. Terry says a friend is taking her test on Friday for citizenship. She's a better American than most Americans. I mean, most Americans can't pass a citizenship test. I mean, isn't that say something about the education system when most Americans could not pass the citizenship test?
Well, it's about the education system, but it's also about our sense of civic responsibility as Americans, right? I mean, we should expect to know that. We should be embarrassed as Americans that we couldn't pass a citizenship test. That's embarrassing, right? We should be proud. We should be patriotic. We should be interested enough in the information that is contained within a citizenship test to know it ourselves.
That's working as intended, though. Yeah. I mean, right? That's working as intended, because if you don't understand how your system of government operates, then they can change it and you'd never know because you just have no idea, right?
That's absolutely true. I mean, there are people out there who believe that the United States Constitution is just a nice document. Right. This is the foundation, the literal foundation of all law that flows in the United States.
Right.
This document, yeah.
It's the group of people who are crying about the Electoral College and the popular vote, and they don't understand why one was set up and the other one wasn't. I mean, again, they didn't understand it was two wolves and a sheep asking what's for dinner. I mean, that's what the Electoral College and the popular vote debate is all about. They don't understand that. It's because they don't understand the system. Or in Hillary Clinton's case, it's because they understand the system, but they want it to be a certain way. Again, it's terrifying.
Well, they believe incorrectly, and you hear the media repeat the lie over and over again. They believe incorrectly that we live in a democracy. We do not. We live in a republic, and this is the beginning of a lot of the misunderstanding among the general public, who are saying, "Oh, we have to save democracy." No, we have to save the republic. The Electoral College is genius in its construction, because you get a vote for every representative, but then you get a vote for the Senate members as well, right? It's a genius construction because it balances population with states' rights. And that's really, I mean, when you look at the federal form of government that we have as a republic, it blends those two ideas together in a very unique fashion. And the Electoral College in its construction was, again, it's a genius construction. We really need to appreciate what those who came before us, the level of thought and consideration that they provided. This was not an accident that they did this. It wasn't because, oh, we can't count all the votes because there's so many people and they're so far dispersed, so we'll do it this way. No, it had architectural consideration given to it, and we really need to appreciate that.
It's a balancing act between population and power. That's what it's all about. That's really what it's about. Ron says, you mean if I sneak into Iran, I won't get free college, healthcare, a cell phone, and a load of free money? I'm shocked. Well, you again, try that in Mexico. In Mexico, you will go to federal prison if you bust into Mexico and do that. And some of the other countries are less nice about it on the southern border. I mean, they are a lot less nice about that. You will end up in prison. It's not they're going to give you free stuff. They're going to give you 3 hots and a cot in a Mexican prison, which is not the Club Fed, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, maybe 1 hot and no cot.
Yeah,
right. I mean, it's not a convenient place to be.
Yeah. Elizabeth says, please ask Nick why Dunleavy is participating in the Office of Refugee Resettlement Program. I don't know if you could say why he is, but do you agree with a program like that where they're resettling refugees? I'm not familiar with the program.
I'm not familiar with the program myself. I guess the question that I would have is, what are we calling a refugee? Right. And this is part of the problem we have nationally. I mean, there's historically been a role for true refugee resettlement in the United States as a part of our immigration program.
Right.
But what we have right now is people calling themselves economic refugees or climate refugees. These are not refugees. These are people who may have problems, but they have nothing to do with being a true refugee. Right. From a war-torn environment or political persecution. And so, in fact, what you've seen from the Biden administration is an attempt, not just here, but throughout government, to try to redefine terms to fit their mold. If you remember the infrastructure bill, so-called, the 80% of it or 90% of it was what they called human infrastructure. What? That's not infrastructure. Infrastructure is steel and concrete. It's roads and railroads and airports. That's infrastructure, and they'll redefine these terms to fit their narrative so that they can shoehorn in the policies that they want to have but can't pass through law.
It's not like refugees from Ukraine, right, where the places are bombed out and people are looking for a place to live. I mean, that's a different thing than somebody who just wants to come to the shining light on the hill. It's a whole different deal. All right, Nick Begich is our guest. We're going to continue. Excuse me. Let's get back to it. The Michael Dukes Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell. Here we go.
The Michael Dukes Show, proudly splitting the left versus right dichotomy. Yeah, I had to look that word up too. I don't think it means what he thinks it means. Here he is, though. That guy, Michael Dukes, the one with the show.
No, I mean, I looked that word up. It actually means what I thought it meant. Maybe I didn't spell it right. I'm not quite sure. All right, we're continuing now with Nick Begich, candidate for the U.S. House. Nick, one of the big things that's been going on, and of course, the big battle now is the war in Israel. Israel versus Hamas and Hezbollah in the strip there and everything else, and we're seeing the crises on campuses and useful minds full of mush out there protesting, usually things they don't even understand, and yet we've got all this aid flowing out. We've got tremendous amounts of aid flowing out. So many, in fact, that the U.S. has depleted its own stockpile of munitions for national security, 155 millimeter howitzer shells. We ain't got no more. I mean, we basically gave them all out to Israel, and we gave them out to Ukraine to use in their war. And so much for that we've shorted our own stockpiles. And now, even if they ramped up production and we're doing it around the clock, it would be 5 or 6 years before we even had our stockpiles back to where they're like a standard level of where we can have it. And that's just munitions, let alone dollars and money and everything else. There's been a lot of problems going on. Johnson split up the aid bills for Israel, Ukraine, and everything else, and then combined them back together after everybody voted so everybody could have a clean vote on it, right? What are your thoughts on this foreign aid and what we need to be doing, what we need to be providing, and do we need to be proxy fighting some of these different wars? What are your thoughts on that?
I think I'll tell you, we've really gotten ourselves into a bind with our foreign aid programs, right? Let's talk about what is foreign aid. What is it before we dive into the answer to that question? Foreign aid is the American taxpayer through their representatives saying, I'm going to give this other nation funding or support of some kind, right? And ultimately, it takes the form of dollars to achieve a generally political or overtly ostensibly humanitarian objective. I've been to some of these countries. Oftentimes, you see that aid, even if it were well-intentioned, the countries have a level of corruption where you'll see people, for example, who are there to distribute wheat or grain or something like this. They're driving around in $100,000 SUVs selling this stuff on the private market or the black market, right? It's not getting distributed properly. It's just getting reallocated and utilized as a part of their grifting operation over there. So we are oftentimes giving aid, even if we do so under well-intentioned auspices, we're giving it to these nations and it's just being corrupted. And I think we've seen a lot of that, particularly in Ukraine. We start with a nation that was either number one or number two most corrupt nation in Europe. And we shouldn't be surprised when the munitions that we're sending over end up in all parts of the world, right? They're being sold off. You've got oligarchs over there who are in government that suddenly have, hundreds of millions of dollars and driving Bentleys. They've got these giant houses. And when you see that, that's your money. That's your money that we were told was there to fight a war, but has been stolen, right? Not just from the Americans, but from the Ukrainian people. I don't believe, and we've talked about it many times on the show, but I don't believe it's the United States' job to go around to the rest of the world and institute a peace regime. I'm all for peace, but we can't go in and start fighting these battles for other people. It's not my view anyway. I mean, they may be worthy battles, but there are many worthy causes. And it's hard to defend a bankrupt nation. We talked earlier in this show about the state of our nation financially. We're losing our capacity to even defend ourselves. As you point out, it's not just the money, it's the munitions. It's having the ability to defend your own nation. And when we start seeing that our aid is taking such a form that it's reducing our own national security, we've got to pause, say, hey, is this really in the interest of the American people?
Can we really export democracy, quote unquote, at the barrel of a gun? I mean, can you really, people have got to want that for themselves. It's not something you can export in that regard. And at some point, we have to acknowledge that we can't be the world's policeman. I mean, we've tried to be. We've been relegated to that role And we're trying to pick winners and losers, and we end up fighting these proxy wars like we're doing right now in Ukraine. I'm not saying that Ukrainians don't have the right to defend themselves. I'm not saying that they shouldn't receive some help, but how much is too much? And again, how much is being consumed by by greed and corruption and everything else? I mean, Ukraine was one of the most corrupt countries in Eastern Europe. I mean, it's not unheard of that you might see some of these dollars slip into somebody's pocket when they should be helping the whole thing. And how much is too much, Nick?
Well, that's really the question. I mean, and Vivek Ramaswamy asked this question. I won't say this without giving him proper citation here, but he asked the question: what is the next $100 billion going to achieve that the first $100 billion did not? That's a reasonable question that we should expect our politicians, our public servants to be asking on our behalf. What are we going to get for this? What are the Ukrainian people going to get for this? Are we going to get a different result because we spent the next $100 billion, or is it time to broker peace? I'm not saying that that we should support the invasion of Ukraine. I'm not saying that we should be happy with where things are at, but we have to be practical and ask the question: are we going to see demonstrable improvements because the American taxpayer has spent this money, because the American citizen has sent these munitions into this war zone incrementally? Is that going to result in a different outcome? Because if it's not, the time for peace is right now, my view.
And of course, the problem with Israel is that they are our ally. And we've provided for them, and we've continued to provide for them, and they're in a no-win scenario, in my opinion, in this fight that they're having in the Gaza area. When you've got people who basically use, the civilians as human shields and everything else, it becomes nothing worse than fighting an insurgency house to house, right? And yet we're continuing to throw money at it, and I don't know, again, when is enough there?
Yeah, and you have to take each one of these individually, and I think this is part of the challenge too. Is that what we saw under? Separately. What we see under leadership is they want to do it all, so they will attempt to conflate the issues, but they're very different issues. You've got Taiwan, Ukraine, Israel. Israel is a long-term ally. They are sort of the singular democracy republic in the Middle East. And as that ally and a counterweight to terrorism in the Middle East, they are strategically important to us in ways that many other nations are not. And so supporting them in their fight is different than supporting Ukraine, and it's different than supporting Taiwan. Each one has its own strategic interests for the American people. There are humanitarian interests that need to be considered. But in Israel, we have a conflict that I believe is never going to be resolved. It's just not going to be resolved. I think Trump made a number of gains with the Abraham Accords, with trying to create a regime of peace over a longer period of time, to take some of these pieces off the board and say, look, we're going to get along. We're going to find ways to get along. But until Iran is addressed, there's never going to be peace there. You have an ideological desire among many in that region to create the preconditions for Armageddon. How do you fight that? How do you beat that? You can't beat that with arms, and you can't beat that with dollars. It's going to take an ideological change in the way that people think and believe if you're ever going to achieve peace in that region. And that's something we have to be honest about. That's the truth. And until we start acknowledging truth in all of these ways and all these aspects in government, we're going to continue to have the same kind of problems that we've had for the last 50, 100, 1,000 years.
Well, I was just going to say, this is a conflict that's been going on for thousands of years in that area, and I don't know that we're going to be able to ever fix it when people are that zealous and that dedicated and are willing to do what that Hamas is willing to do at this point, which again is hide among civilians and do all that kind of stuff and use them as shields. There's really no way to root them out without basically taking a bulldozer to the whole thing and just scraping it from one side to the other. I mean, there's just, creating a green field on one side. I mean, you just can't do it. So how much money do we continue we want to support them? I mean, I believe Israel has a right to exist, but I mean, how much money and booty and do we continue to pour into that?
Well, and I tell people, look, if this had happened in the United States, just imagine that that one of our neighbors started lobbing thousands of rocket propelled projectiles, missiles into Texas or into Seattle.
Right.
What do you think we would do? Do you think the American people would just would exercise restraint and say, let's not do anything? Are you kidding me? We wouldn't care what the rest of the world thought, what they did. We would do what we needed to do, which is to defend our homeland.
Right. They paraglide into Yuma, Arizona and start killing people and taking hostages back across the border. Are we just going to sit around and do nothing? I mean, it makes no sense. I could definitely see the reaction. But again, my question becomes, how much is the U.S.'s responsibility to help prop that up, and how much should they be fighting on their own?
Yeah, I mean, and it's a difficult question. You know, what is the right number? I don't have an answer for you, and that's a difficult question to answer. You know, is it 1 billion? Is it 10 billion? Is it 100 billion? I think we can say what it's not, right? I think there's a point at which we have to say, no, this is enough. But again, I think that we need to be pushing for peaceful resolution to the extent that it can even be achieved in all of these venues. The truth of the matter is that the United States post-World War II, our Army and Air Force and Navy and Marines were constructed in such a way that we could successfully fight a two-front war. There's three fronts we're talking about right now. Three fronts. We don't have the ability, even if we were drawn in, and God help us if we are, but even if we were drawn in to these conflicts, we don't have the ability to fight a three-front war and win.
Yeah.
And so we need to be brokers for peace, not funders for additional conflict.
Nick Begich is our guest. Nick, we're down to the last 90 seconds of this morning show. That hour goes quick. I'll give you the final word here this morning.
Well, there's a couple things I wanted to talk about today. We didn't get to them, but let me just mention a couple of things. The government has removed coffee from the CPI index because coffee went up 78% since September. Gold reserves among federal banks are at the highest levels since the 70s. Mortgage rates are so high that we've never seen mortgage payments as high as they are right now in our nation. The Biden administration wants you to believe that everything's fine and the government's going great and we have nothing to worry about. But the reality is, for normal people, we recognize there's a problem. We want to fix these problems. We got to bring people into the House and the Senate and the presidency who are serious about getting our fiscal house in order and restoring the liberties and freedoms that we have under the United States Constitution. I want to be one of those people. I want to be that person for you, Alaska. Get involved. This is your seat. Let's take it back in November.
Nick Begich, our guest. We're out of time, folks. We'll see you tomorrow. All right. Yeah, I mean, taking coffee out of the CPI because, I mean, I love how they've started to cherry pick all this stuff, right? I mean, that's not the first thing that they've done. They've machinated that the CPI calculation and the inflationary calculation so much over the last 10 years. The more you look at it, the more you realize that inflation is, I mean, it's upwards into double digits and nobody is really saying anything. If you look at the way that they used to calculate it versus how they calculate it now, it's a whole different critter.
It totally is. These guys, they play this economics game where they say, hey, well, you know, we'll just replace it with a substitute. Well, if steak goes up, you can always eat chicken. So we'll remove steak and put chicken in here and it'll be fine. It's all the same thing. What's the substitute for coffee? I don't know.
Hot water.
Someone tell me, please.
Hot water and mud. We're just going to throw some dirt in it and we're going to cook it and it'll be fine. No, I mean, it's crazy, but that's how they keep maneuvering the numbers so that it doesn't look as bad as it really is. Mm-hmm. And that's what they can't get around. And the economy is going to be the number one issue in this election. I can guarantee it. I mean, they can squawk about aid, they can squawk about immigration, gun control, everything else, but everything you're seeing, look at what just happened in Fairbanks. That was strictly an issue of economy. with that special election in Fairbanks over that $10 million that they wanted to cut over the top of the tax cap to save the children, right, for the children. But that was really an economic issue. So the economy is going to be the number one issue in this election. I guarantee it.
I agree. And I think it's going to be the number one issue for a while because, again, until we start seeing our domestic capacity to produce come back and fiscal balance restored to the Congress, this isn't going to get better. It's going to get worse. And so it will continue to be an issue until the public decides it's such an issue that we're going to elect competent, convicted members of Congress. And I mean that convicted in the sense of conviction, not they've been to prison, members of Congress who are prepared to fix the problem. You've got to recognize the problem. You mentioned it earlier in an earlier segment, Michael. You have to recognize the problem before you can start to fix it. And so we need to make sure that the voters out there understand what is causing the problems that they're experiencing today. If we continue to believe, as one of the commenters mentioned earlier this morning, that bringing home the bacon is the answer to our economic woes, oh boy, we're in for a long world of hurt before we wake up. That is not the answer. The answer is not to continue to print more money to fix the problem. That's the problem itself.
No, we've got to acknowledge there's a problem before we can fix it. And if we just keep going along like la, 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 I can't hear what you're saying because we're awesome. That's not going to fix anything, right? In the long run.
That's right.
All right, Nick. Well, thank you so much. You going to be anywhere anytime soon that people need to come see you?
Many places. I mean, we're traveling so much; it's hard to keep track of the schedule. We just got back from that DC trip. The very next day, I was out in Kasilof at the Big T, Tustamina Lodge. Had a great event. The very next day, I was in Healy for Alaska Mining Day. So,
wow.
For those familiar with Alaskan geography, that's a long drive, both directions. But we're all over the place. Just check our Facebook page, Nick for Alaska. And we put stuff out there about where we're going to be. I know we've got a meet and greet later this week. We've got some details out there on the website and on the Facebook page. If you'd like to attend, we'd love to see you.
NickForAlaska.com. All right, Nick Begich, our guest. Thank you, Nick. Appreciate you coming on board. As always, a fun conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Folks, we're out of time for today. We got more coming up tomorrow. Be kind, love one another, live well. The Michael Dukes Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We'll see you then. Have a good day.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Dukes Show.
Bye.